One of the weaknesses of teaching this course online is that we can't have vigorous discussions about in class about what type of strategy company X or company Y is offering. But I often point out to people that cost leadership strategies aren't necessarily predicated on offering the lowest price. It does often turn out that way, but it doesn't have to turn out that way. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. But here's the key thing that a cost leader has to offer: it offers a product that suits the typical industry customer. It is not a product that is necessarily very cheap or very poorly made. Now, you could argue that might get into a focused cost leadership strategy because they're focusing on people who don't have great quality expectations. But the correct answer to the question, what type of product does a cost leader offer, is they offer the industry standard product. If it, in my mind, clearly breaks out and you go like, yeah, there's the industry standard and then there's this company, well, then again, they're probably often a focused cost strategy of dealing with people who are particularly price sensitive. And the illustration I give for that is pizza. Does anybody go to Cici's Pizza or Little Caesars Pizza because they go like, I think they've got great pizza? I love their pizza. I mean, there are usually one or two students in an undergraduate class that will say, yeah, I actually think I like Little Caesars the best. The rest of the class is going like this. Nope, it's not. And so I think arguably those companies aren't offering the industry standard product, but they're focusing on very price conscious customers, and it works for them. And in that case, they are running a focused cost leadership. Then we get into the idea of how does a cost leader produce a product cheaper than its competitors? Well, that gets into the value chain. How can they pull out cost that is not apparent to the customer? Or how do they pull out cost without reducing the value of the offering? That is the essence of a cost leadership person. We'll look at the value chain in just a few minutes and talk about that, but that's what we're looking at. Now, how does a cost leader or a cost leadership strategy generate higher profits? There are two pathways, generally two pathways, and even though you don't have to tie it to price sensitivity, it makes the most sense if you tie it to price sensitivity. If a cost leader is in a product market where the customers are quite price sensitive, then having a cost leadership advantage allows them to slightly reduce their prices to the point where they still have the same profit margins as their competitors. But because they have that lower price, more people are going to prefer them, and that's going to lead to a greater volume of sales. I think arguably that's what Walmart does. If you're in a market where customers are not as price sensitive, you may be better off charging the same price as everyone else and just accepting the higher margins because your costs are lower. You can provide the product more cheaply. I'm sorry, less expensively than your competitors, and you just reap the higher profit margins. Those companies running a cost leadership strategy in particular are difficult for the consumer to spot because they don't look any different. It's just they're making a lot more money. In the publicly traded sphere, that would come to light because you would see that company have superior profits and have a better stock price. In the private markets, where small businesses, you may never know because the owner's just making a lot more money than his or her competitors, and it's not apparent to anybody other than those people who are familiar with the books. I'm going to stop the video and switch views to a web page and show you, I think, a great example of a cost leadership company. How many of you have heard of the online jeweler Blue Nile? And guys, if you're single and you've not bought that big engagement ring, you might want to pay particular attention to this because maybe Blue Nile is going to be a great option for you. Blue Nile was started as a part of the .com boom, if you will, and its proposition was simple. Basically, and you may be offended when I say this, it's easy to sell an on-par product in the diamond industry because diamonds are independently graded with the 4 C's: cut, color, clarity, and carat, or the size. So diamonds are actually pretty easy to compare if you see their their ratings. When I say pretty easy to compare, you can look at them online and compare the two stones based on the 4 C's. And so Blue Nile's idea was, we're going to cut out all that middleman and all the marketing baloney. And we're going to go straight for offering you a great diamond at a great price. That fits in precisely to Michael Porter's view that you have to do things differently. In this case, the differently is how they or how they distribute, if you will, how they market the diamonds. What's interesting to me is how they've evolved over their slightly over 20 years of being a company. So they have lots of different options, legendary 30-day service. They now have the ability to design your own engagement ring, and you could view that as a point of differentiation and say, well, maybe they're really doing an integrated strategy. I would say that's more of an attempt to compete on par with people to truly offer that industry opportunity. I would be interested to know what percentage of their rings are custom designed. My guess would be not very many. And so, engagement ring style guide. This is where they try to explain to you stuff and say, this is why you don't need a salesman explaining it to you, because it's actually pretty straightforward. And then I'm going to scroll down and let you see the Blue Nile story in a nutshell. They do have a few bricks and mortars, but not many. Amazing value, highest quality design at a great price. That the highest quality is a little bit of hype, but that is a great definition of cost leader. 30-day returns. See that this is where they're trying to make sure that you're comfortable buying it online. They talk about they've been around since 1999, and they have the perfect piece. This is a great capture, of the Blue Nile value proposition. So I'm going to stop the video again and resize. So how do cost leadership strategies usually succeed? Often they have scale economies, which is to say they're taking advantage of the fact that they're bigger than a lot of their competitors, and that gives them some sort of economies. Walmart, again, is a great example of that. They're so large, they have a lot of buying power, a lot of power over their suppliers, and that allows them to get a great price. Learning curve, in other words, you just continue to stay ahead of your competitors and figuring out how to do what you do more cheaply. You may have access to lower cost inputs. For example, you see a lot of manufacturing companies right now that are locating down in Southeast Texas because there's a lot of natural gas. It's kind of the natural gas hub, and that makes it a good place to manufacture, particularly petrochemicals and the like. You get a built-in advantage that you're able to source the natural gas more cheaply, or the idea of just a particularly lean organization. Later on in the course, when we talk about organizations, cost leaders are often organized in a functional category because that tends to be the lowest cost. In general, the cost leadership comes through usually superior logistics. In other words, they do a great job of just moving stuff around at a cheaper price point than others. And then there are trade-offs involved. There are things that you are not doing as you try to generate fit in your value chain. And so you can read some of the comments on the slides. But for example, Blue Nile, they don't do much TV advertising. Compare that to their competitors. They don't pay workers. They centralize their sales force, if you will, in a call center, which some people are going to perceive as less personal, and it's not going to have the high touch, and so you're going to miss out on those customers that really need the high touch service. So that's all a part of it. A excellent cost leader has a very tight strategy, or has a very tight value chain fit, such that it's not easy to make changes when things get optimized. So one of the big benefits of being a cost leader is it can be a very strong position. If you really have a cost advantage, you have an advantage over your rivals in that you can cut prices if need be while preserving as good a margins as they have. It is not of a strong position over buyers unless they're very price sensitive buyers. Substitutes, you press them because you can cut the price lower, and if they can't match that, likewise for potential entrants. You have such an efficient value chain that it is hard for them to come in and compete with you on cost. They almost always are going to have to come in and compete on a differentiation basis. And as far as suppliers go, relative to your industry competitors, you're a little more protected against aggressive suppliers, because if suppliers try to increase the prices of what they're charging you, you can better absorb that price increase than can your suppliers. Now, what are the downsides or the risks of a cost leadership? One is that your product can be no longer perceived as the industry par product or the industry standard product. And so then you fall out the bottom end and people aren't willing to pay for your product at any price because it's just not worth it. And so then you have to do some sort of innovation to bring yourself to be up on par. Porter would argue and say another big problem with the cost leadership strategy is it's not hard to imitate. And in theory, I would agree with him. It is not hard to imitate. In practice, sometimes it is. And that's where, when you get into the fit in the value chain and how you are providing that lower cost but on par product, is not as easy to tease out as some people would want it to be. So some people would say it's easy to imitate. I'm not sure that I agree with them. If you really have a cost leadership advantage, then you've figured out a way that is not all of that easy to imitate. So the next strategy is differentiation. Jump into that with the next video with me.